At my husband's funeral, my son Daniel stood at the podium with a trembling voice and thanked any other girl. She changed into the only who turned into circle of relatives to us, he said. At that second, all eyes in the room grew to become to the lady in the front row, the only inside the fitted dress and best makeup, with sensitive tears resting in her eyes. And me, the real wife, the mother, I sat off to the aspect, ignored, invisible. When the attorney later informed me that my husband had left the entirety to her, not a single dime for me, embraced my son and smiled a positive smile as though she had already received. However then, I pulled out the second wheel, and just like that there was nobody in the room smiling anymore. I never imagined my existence might begin a brand new at a funeral. Robert died in a sudden automobile accident. He became driving downtown that morning in a heavy rain. They stated the brakes failed on a curve, and the automobile crashed right into a grocery store. He was gone brief. The health practitioner said he failed to suffer, however I wasn't sure he deserved one of these clean departure. We had been married for 40 years. I used to suppose our marriage, at the same time as no longer romantic, become as a minimum solid, like one of these old homes weathered by using storms, worn on the out-of-doors, but still standing. I gave up my profession to generally tend to each nook of our domestic. He always stated, "I will contend with you. You don't need to paintings." And I assumed him. I naively concept it changed into some form of love. On the memorial, I wore his favorite charcoal gray wool coat and stood by means of the chapel entrance, greeting guests. The wind whipped. My palms had been numb. Nevertheless, I smiled, doing my fine to make certain his farewell turned into dignified and orderly. Robert cared so much approximately appearances about what other people thought of him. Even in his death, I discovered myself maintaining that neat facade for him. Daniel turned into at the podium. He's our best toddler. He turns 33 this, and is a back-quit engineer for a tech employer. He wore a sharp darkish fit. His face became solemn, and his voice was as regular as usually. After reading a tribute to his father, he paused and his eyes. "There may be a person I need to present a special thanks to," Daniel said, his voice a touch shaky. The room fell silent. I clutched my handbag in my lap, my knuckles turning white. Idea he become about to say, "my mother." In that moment, I may want to almost pay attention it forming in his throat, that long-awaited. 40 years of companionship, determination to the home, nights spent at the medical institution, all of the quiet sacrifices. I genuinely believed he had eventually seen me. However, what came next sliced through me like a dull blade, stripping that desire away inch by inch. Someone who supported my father via the toughest time of his life, omit. A smooth murmur went down the aisle. From the front row, a female stood up and dabbed her eyes, nodding politely. She wore a deep emerald inexperienced wool coat, black heels, ideal makeup, and flawlessly hair. As she sat down, those round her grew to become to appearance curious and amazed. I felt sound explode in my ears like a detonated silence. I knew the name. She turned into Robert's administrative assistant at the company. He later promoted her to a consulting accomplice, even in short including her on the board. When I might ask about her, he'd always downplay it. "She's in a position. Don't be paranoid." I remembered that's corporation birthday celebration. She brought me wine, smiling sweetly, shifting with the ease of a female who sued in. I brushed off her at the time as just some other worker. Searching. Again now, how ironic. From across the room, someone whispered, "She's sitting so close like she's circle of relatives." And my son had simply thanked that girl at his father's funeral. I felt just like the chair had dropped from under me. My ears have been ringing, and the arena vibrated faintly. Humans came as much as shake my hand, murmuring the standard. He became an amazing man. Well, leave out him. I nodded automatically like a system, repeating pre-programmed responses. I had planned to keep on until the give up to keep. Appearances, however, then I heard Daniel whisper too, "You are the one who is absolutely family." I almost dropped the teacup in my hand. In that moment, I realized this funeral wasn't for Robert. It was for a hidden international I failed to understand existed, and I was only a stranger, a discarded observer. That night, again domestic, I sat in the empty living room. As I took off the coat, I noticed that the satin ribbon changed into wrinkled, as if the ultimate of my marriage's dignity had been by accident snapped. I sat at the eating room table and stared at the row of empty chairs. Robert's seat became nonetheless in its area. I hadn't moved it. For decades, he'd constantly sat there, hand at the armrest, looking ahead to me to convey him his soup. Now it changed into just alone, and the armrest had long gone cold. There have been nonetheless bottles of his preferred beer within the fridge. I in no way appreciated the logo. It was too bitter, but he'd buy us 6% every week only for him. Seems is the jail. I did not sleep that night time. I pulled out a few antique picture albums. Within the pics, we had been nevertheless young. There was light in his eyes. I smiled easily back then. I even determined an antique employee id from while I was a monetary representative at his company. Short hair, self-assured, usually seated 2D from the right at every board assembly. Then he informed me, "You should stop. I'll take care of the entirety." And that I foolishly listened. I closed the album and poured myself a glass of water. The kitchen clock ticked. I realized all the pride, all the patience I had once poured into keeping our marriage intact had been buried the instant he died. What I didn't know, however, turned into that beneath all this was a deeper betrayal. The subsequent morning, each phrase I heard inside the attorney's office felt like a line from an existence script I was in no way invited to examine. The air smelled faintly of ink and old wood shelves. A dwindled print of the charter hung crooked at the wall, and daylight filtered through the blinds, slicing the floor into slim strips of mild. It became the law firm. Robert had unique earlier than his loss of life. The lead attorney was a man in his 50s, with a gradual, heavy voice. Each syllable became drawn out, as if to underscore something unsaid. Pursuant to the need signed via Mr. Robert Smith 3 years in the past, he started with mechanical calm. The general public of his belongings, inclusive of the principal residence inn, the holiday property in Nantucket, and the remaining stability of his personal money owed, will be inherited by Ms. Is. I wasn't simply bowled over. I felt like I might been driven off the primary degree of my own existence, left status backstage in a lifeless highlight, unsure if I had ever simply played the component I concept changed into mine. I turned to have a look at Daniel. He sat ramrod instantly, his gaze constant ahead as though he had been being attentive to a quarterly financial file. His palms were flawlessly interlocked. No longer a hint of wonder, no longer a shift in his expression, as though he had all alongside. Whilst the analyzing changed into over, I stood up and walked over to him. "You knew," I stated in a low, trembling voice. "Didn't you?" He looked at me with an unusually serene tone. Dad had his motives. His reasons. I whispered, the words choked in my throat. What did 40 years of marriage imply to him? Daniel became silent for a second, then stated, he worked hard his entire existence. Changed into there for him. She understood him. He reduced his voice, nearly apologetically. You did not. In that moment, I noticed it honestly. No longer had I misplaced my husband. I was losing my son. He wasn't defending his father's memory. He was redrawing the own family tree and erasing me from the map. When I were given home, I stood inside the driveway for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my purse numbing my arm. I went into the bedroom and opened Robert's closet. His shirts, ties, and wool vests were still perfectly organized, with that acquainted heady scent of delicate decorum. But what lies had been woven into the one's fibers? While did he determine I was now not circle of relatives? Become it the 12 months I forgot to buy his favorite wine for our anniversary. Or before that, when I quit my activity as his economic consultant and just became a housewife. I began looking through the drawers for proof I wasn't crazy. Vintage ledgers, snapshots, receipts, vintage Enterprise playing cards. Within the kitchen drawer, I discovered a folder of letters Robert had stored. One became from the Nantucket Property Control Company. The date was 6 years ago. The recipient. My arms were shaking. I have been to that house by way of the ocean infinite times, no longer realizing I used to be only a visitor. That afternoon, I walked across the street to visit our longtime neighbor. She became a widow in her overdue 70s with a pointy reminiscence and a lawn brimming with roses. Once I mentioned name, her face stiffened. Wasn't she the only Robert would take to the one symphonies? She requested, elevating an eyebrow. You didn't go along with them. I pressured a smile. My mouth turned into dry. I by no means genuinely liked social events a whole lot. Shifted in her. Azid. Oh, I constantly thought they were an item. She's been in this street numerous times. 365 days, she helped Robert positioned up the Christmas lights. I froze. That Christmas, I used to be caught upstairs with a swollen knee. Robert had instructed me, a community boy had helped him. Do you bear in mind when they commenced getting close? I asked. Stirred her tea, wondering at the least 10, maybe 15 years ago. I recollect seeing her around here when you were away taking care of your sister. I thought she'd become a few cousin or something. 15 years. I sat in solar room feeling like a stranger who had walked into the wrong residence. Most of these years, I had controlled our retirement budget right down to the last penny. I had chosen his, scheduled his physicals, or even dipped into my dad and mom final savings to rescue his agency at some stage in a cash disaster. And he were building golden bricks for some other female's future out of my sight, out of my attain. Returning home, I finally determined an vintage cardboard container within the basement filled with photographs. There was Robert standing next to at a company event. His hand rested lightly on her arm, smiling a radiant smile like never before. He appeared relaxed, more youthful, happier than he ever regarded beside me. And in a single picture there was Daniel, barely 18 or 19, status with them. His smile was fearful, however not reluctant. One corner of the photo was marked out. I rubbed it lightly with an eraser and exposed a line written in pen. Our little family can be respectable at some point. I ought to nearly hear something smash in my chest. It wasn't a heart. It wasn't glass. It was something deeper. Something known as agree with. And it might by no means be entire once more. That night time, I lit an unmarried candle within the kitchen. And for the first time on this house without Robert, I put on song, a sluggish, gentle, unhurried jazz document. I started out to surprise. Maybe I might lived my entire life to his rhythm and never danced to my very own. But not anymore. From now on, the track, the beat, the dance steps, it's all mine to select. I idea the worst became over. The desire, the truth about the residences. Taking her area on the center of all of it, openly classified as circle of relatives. That changed into enough humiliation for a lifetime. However, I hadn't found out that what could sincerely destroy my heart changed into Daniel. He is my best infant. I had believed that, but unrecognizable the rest of the sector have become, he could still be mine. We agreed to meet on the Metropolis Cafe, the one where he used to get caramel dessert as a little boy. He confirmed up in a trench coat, his demeanor stiff and formal as if he had been preparing for an interview, now not to meet his mother. Earlier than I may want to sit down, he placed his telephone face down on the table. He usually did that, a subtle signal that any buzz could be a reason to desert the communication. "Why did you ship a legal observe?" he asked bluntly. I took a deep breath and seemed him inside the eyes. "Do you watched I should not have?" He shrugged. "She didn't harm you. Dad gave her the money. It was his selection. Suing her just makes anyone uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," I said, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Daniel, your father deceived me for many years. I gave up my profession for this family. My pals for you. I even sold my mother's emerald ring simply to pay your university tuition. Do you know what that ring's supposed to me?" Daniel frowned, exhaling with scene infection. "You continually bring it up like I owe you something." That hit me like a stupid blow to the chest. It wasn't anger, now not even an issue, simply distance. A chilly and definitive distance. "Dad instructed me," Daniel said after a pause, his voice losing, that the happiest years of his existence had been with. She understood him. She respected him. She failed to always question and criticize him like you probably did. I puzzled him because he stopped respecting me, I said, gritting my teeth. I criticized him due to the fact he was incorrect. Daniel shook his head, as though he were taking note of a meaningless sermon. "You are too traditional, Mom. You've got constantly believed that making sacrifices is a virtue, but Dad didn't need that type of love. It is after I understood." It wasn't an unexpected revelation for him. He had been thinking this manner for a long term. He simply hadn't said it until now. I looked at him for a moment. All I should see was the boy he was. The boy who breathed raggedly at some point of allergies assaults, while I sat with the aid of his mattress all night. The teen who changed into bullied in college. Whose dignity I defended as though it had been my own. The 17-year-old whose heart turned into broken for the first time, and who curled up next to me on the outside bench in silence till the celebs came. Out. Did he don't forget any of that. I reached into my handbag and pulled out an old, faded photograph. "That summertime, whilst you were, we went to the seaside," I stated, sliding the photo across the table. "Your father subsidized out at the remaining minute for paintings, so it turned into just the two people. Inside the image, he's carrying vibrant crimson swim trunks and status on moist sand with a trail of tiny, wobbly footprints at the back of him. You have been frightened of the waves. You would preserve onto my neck and just scream, 'Mommy. Mommy.' You didn't realize an awful lot approximately the world lower back then, however you knew where protection turned into." Daniel regarded down and said nothing. "I know you idolize your father," I continued. He was continually elegantly became out, by no means raised his voice, always said the right thing. "But did you ever suppose that maybe I set the muse for that fashionable man to exist?" He looked up. There have been no tears, no regret, only a flicker of hesitation. "Dad did what made him glad," said. She made him sense. "Wanted. You were simply too strong. Too strong. That become what I was. I idea about those nights spent balancing overdue debts, the afternoons I cooked with a fever, the years I held back tears at Robert's cold silences and saved smiling besides. That is what he intended with the aid of Too Strong." I placed the photo back in my wallet and stood up. My voice sounded calm, but it had a deep firmness. "You are right. I used to be too strong. And beginning today, I'll keep that energy for myself." Something he stated after that, I failed to hear it. I walked out the cafe door into the automobile parking space. It had started out to rain. The drops hit the windshield with a slow, relentless rhythm, an orchestra made totally of silence. I slid into the motive forces seat and wrapped my fingers around the steerage wheel, pausing for a protracted second. I failed to cry. I didn't crumble. I just sat there understanding that what I had lost wasn't just a husband. I had misplaced my marriage, my circle of relatives, even my son. But in that same breath, I understood something else. I may want to not anticipate someone else to inform me who I used to be. It turned into time to live for myself. In the beginning, I notioned become just a late-life twist of fate in Robert's tale, a calculated opportunist, a lady who slipped in through the cracks. But now I see matters simply. She was by no means a twist of fate. She had deliberate the whole lot. On a rainy afternoon, I sat at the kitchen desk with a mug of bloodless espresso in my arms, looking at her public Facebook profile. Her profile picture showed her on the seaside, smiling softly, the historical past edited with a tasteful blur, as though she did not want all and sundry to look what turned into honestly in the back of her. Her bio stated, consultant in the structure area, lover of classical track and community service, thankful for life's tender enterprise. I clicked on her picture albums. The first photograph, Robert changed into seated in a wicker chair, preserving a slice of lemon pie she had reputedly made for him. The textual content said, "His smile is my favored praise." The date stamp stated it was 6 years ago. The equal 12 months I was bedridden with arthritis. Robert had told me then that work turned into overwhelming, and he would be journeying a lot. I thought him. He was sincerely evading the burden of worrying for someone. But now I knew he wasn't escaping me. He become living elsewhere without me. I scrolled down and observed extra images, both familiar and peculiar, at once. There was Robert standing in his living room, inside the wool jacket I had given him. There he become helping her plant plants and arrange bonsai in her garden. After which a video came up. Robert became toasting her with a Christmas song gambling softly in the background. Daniel became there. I iced over. My hand hovered over the touchpad. Daniel, who changed into nonetheless in university at the time, had barely longer hair and a shy, boyish face. Had her arm around his shoulder and said, giggling, "Your dad ought to be happy with you." This is after I understood. Become in no way just Robert's mystery. She were positioning herself for years as a part of our circle of relatives, and that I used to be the girl she deliberate to displace. I called Ruth. Ruth were a close colleague throughout my years at Robert's firm, one of the few ladies I had saved in contact with when I left the activity. She became semi-retired now, supporting her daughter boost a grandchild and taking on the occasional freelance economic case. She spoke back on the second one ring with the equal electricity she constantly had. "My goodness," I heard approximately Robert. "I've been which means to call you." "Thanks," I said. I did not stall. "Ruth, I want you to assist me discover something." She didn't hesitate. "Inform me what you suspect." I paused. My voice sounded calm, but it was firm. "I accept as true with Robert used employer budget, for as a minimum the ultimate decade to buy properties, and there might be other unaccounted for transfers." Ruth went quiet. "You're now not just fixing a wedding. You are looking to reveal fraud." "I need the truth," I said. "I've spent too long inside the darkish." We agreed to fulfill at her house in 2 days. Within the intervening time, I became a girl on a mission. I went to the neighborhood library and seamed up asset statistics in one residence, a unmarried family villa under her call. Purchase date, 5 years in the past, right on the tail give up of the agency's employee housing blessings mission, the identical one Robert was overseeing. I had visited there throughout that assignment. I do not forget joking at the time, "On the next ride, you take me too." He dodged the idea. You would not love it there. Now I knew the room became not reserved for customers. It become for her. Days later, I drove to Ruth's house. Her domestic was in a quiet suburb, a faded bungalow with a row of withering out the front. She greeted me with a tumbler of lemon tea and opened her computer. I checked some archived price information, she stated, scrolling through 3 entries classified outside consulting support. However, the beneficiary company is a shell. No physical office is indexed. She zoomed in on one line. $50,000 paid the same month. You have been domestic convalescing from surgical procedure. My stomach twisted. Ruth looked at me with challenge from at the back of her glasses. Are you certain you want to go through with this? The general public would simply choose to permit it move. I didn't answer. I just saved a screenshot of the report to my flash drive. On the drive home, I went gradual. The sun hit the windshield hard, and the air smelled of early autumn. The radio performed an antique 60s ballad. The chorus repeated softly, "You only find the truth when you prevent pretending." Sure, when you stop pretending, do you begin to see clearly? Again at domestic, I sat in front of the laptop and saved photos to a brand new folder. I named it Proof. I was not the woman who buried her feelings in the back of a stove. I was Smith, the legal spouse of Robert, the mother of Daniel, the only who had been edited out of her own life story, and the female who changed into about to rewrite the finishing. The second one batch of files from Ruth arrived simply as I was wiping down the kitchen sink. Daylight filtered via the blinds, casting easy stripes throughout the countertop. I paused for a second with a rag in my hand, an idea that became how my marriage have been maintained. Tidy, silent, till the kitchen no longer felt like mine. The email challenge turned into easy. 3 suspicious transactions, key, initial felony feasibility evaluation. I opened it. Some acquainted PDF statements crammed the display screen. Ruth had annotated them. The corporation name, Quint Consulting LLC. The account tied to. The transfers, 3 bills, totaling over $350,000, cautiously staggered over 5 years, every one timed just outside the company's authentic audit cycles. She added a word. This sum lacks enough justification. Unless invoices for services of equivalent value may be produced, this is probably a fraudulent gift. There it was, the proof. I felt a knot of clear-up form in my chest. I knew what to do. That afternoon, I known as a lawyer who specialized in fraud and corporate law. I have a whole host of questions. I said, my voice steady and clean. I accept as true with my past due husband, systematically, plundered his organization to useful resource his longtime mistress. The attorney was a lady named. She was in her mid-50s, and her voice at the telephone become heat and no nonsense. She listened calmly as I talked. You want to ship me the entirety you have, she said. Each file, every email, each photo. I hung up and started out copying the files. Whilst I used to be completed, I had over 50 files. I printed the entirety out, arranged it smartly in a folder, and took it to her downtown law workplace. Her firm become in a picture skyscraper, and I took inside the view of the Chicago skyline as I waited. While she walked in, she had a kind, expert smile. She had a sharp haircut that framed her chin and wore a perfectly fit. She took the folder, flipped through it, and nodded. We will go through this, she said. I will be in touch. Thank you, I said, looking at her. She betrayed me and my son helped her. I want her to pay lower back every closing heady cent. Pushed her glasses higher on her nose. We are able to do our exceptional. The following few months had been a whirlwind of appointments, emails, and criminal proceedings. We filed a lawsuit against, and the case made waves. Robert's former company, his legal professional, and even his property became entangled in the case. Then there was Daniel. He took side. He changed into outraged. "You're destroying his memory," he stated to me on the phone. "Daniel, your memory of your father is a fairy story," I stated. "He became a con guy who used cash to betray me, his spouse, and his son's mother. It's the truth." He hung up. I waited for him to name lower back, however he did not. It harm, however I did it besides. I needed to. The case went to court, and her attorney attempted to paint it as a false impression. They claimed the finances have been valid payments for consulting offerings. They produced faux invoices that Robert had given her. But we had Ruth's proof, and we had Robert's photographs. I took the stand and instructed what happened. I pointed out the 40 years of our marriage, about the sacrifices I made for him and Daniel, and about the ache I felt when I learned the fact. The decide, a black female in her mid-60s, checked out me with understanding. I think she understood what goes on inside the hearts of ladies like me. Ultimately, the judge ruled in our favor. She ordered to pay lower back the whole thing Robert had given her, such as hobby. The overall sum was over $1 million. Needed to sell the properties she had bought with the stolen cash. She become broke. She lost her process and her popularity. I in no way saw her again. As for Daniel, he failed to speak to me for years. Then, while my father died, he referred to as me. We met at the funeral and embraced. We commenced seeing each different again. I informed him the whole story, and he began to understand. It took years, however we mended our dating. He apologized to me. He said he becomes simplest, protecting in phantasm the complete time. I hugged him and instructed him that I had believed in him the whole time. And in that second, there were tears in many eyes. Daniel walked over and hugged me softly. "Mother," he stated, smiling. "Why did you get so top at giving speeches?" I smiled back. "I constantly was. You simply were not listening." We each laughed. Anyone laughed. Earlier than the birthday party turned into over, I took a quick stroll in the lawn. I ended in the front of the crab apple tree I had planted 20 years ago. "Ultimate year, this element nearly died," I said. "I nearly reduce it down, however this spring it bloomed earlier than ever, and it is nonetheless blooming." The women chuckled. I added, even she knew what remains alive need to not be given up on. That night time, when all people had left, I folded up the chairs and positioned them away within the shed. The porch tinkled softly in the breeze. I turned to watch the sundown. It rested above the antique maple tree on the stop of the road, as though to mention, "Hooray you." I took off my heels, walked barefoot into the house, hung up the dress, and went to Mistress. I knew who I was. I used to be a survivor, a fighter, and the truth had set me loose.